Hello and welcome. Welcome back to another live stream, weekly live stream of Baha'i Explorations on Sundays. We have with us today Christopher Buck. He has quite an engaging presentation today. I really appreciate you coming. Chris, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to read a brief write-up on him and then we will continue on. Chris Buck, PhD, publishes broadly as an independent scholar in the wide range of fields, including American Studies, Native American Studies, African American Studies, Religious Studies, Islamic Studies, and Baha'i Studies. His PhD from University of Toronto, 1996, is in the academic study of religions, and his law degree, 2006, is from Western Michigan University, Thomas Cooley Law School. He wanted me to really just highlight his book because it's a very in-depth and comprehensive kind of easy to read book on the Baha'i faith. And so here it is. Baha'i faith, the basics provide a thorough and accessible introduction to a fascinating independent world religion, examining its historical development, current community building efforts, and the social contributions of the Baha'i faith in the world today. This introduction covers beliefs, Baha'i spiritual teachings, principles, Baha'i social teachings, history, Bahá'u'lláh and his covenant, scripture, Baha'i sacred texts and inspired guidance, institutions, Baha'i administrative order, building community, what Baha'is do, social action, Baha'i social and economic development projects, public discourse, the Baha'i international community, visions, foundation for a future golden age, with features including a glossary of terms and references to the Baha'i writings throughout. This is the ideal text for students and interested readers wanting to familiarize themselves with the Baha'i faith. And now for today's topic specifically, which is Muhammad is the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. And then another quote, on the day when they will be brought into the presence of their Lord, their greeting to each other will be, peace be with you. And this is from the Quran 33:44a. Could you explain that real quick for people who don't understand or who don't have a lot of knowledge of the Quran, Chris?
The seal of the prophets verse is probably the single most important prophetological verse, doctrinally speaking, for Muslims worldwide, generally, okay? And a verse that's not looked at too often, 4 verses later, is about one of several verses in the Quran, actually about a third of the Quran. And I see that my esteemed colleague, Todd Lawson, is online, can address this a lot more fully. What he calls the epic or apocalyptic dimension of the Quran. It's a full third of the Quran talks about the last day. So one of the features to look forward to in the last day, according to the Quran, if literally read, is meeting God. That's what verse 33:44 is about.
Fantastic. Chris is going to give his presentation. It's going to be until 12 p.m. And then following that, we will have questions and answers for about 30 minutes. So feel free, if you have questions or you would like to make a comment, to hold those for that time. And if you can, so that the moderators can get to everyone's question, use the raise hand function, which is in the reactions. And if you need some more specifics, feel free to message me directly in the chat for anyone on the Zoom. And for anyone who's watching online, feel free to drop a comment and I'll be checking that throughout the presentation as well. So if you would, Chris, if you would take it away.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Today's presentation is on an interesting topic, at least of interest to me. And that interest began when I was writing my master's thesis, which since was published under the title Symbol and Secret, Quran Commentary in Bahá'u'llah's Kitab-i-Igan. And without further ado, let's go to the dedication page. I want to welcome all of the participants here. Again, I especially am delighted to see my colleague, Dr. Todd Lawson, online as well. My thanks to the Clearwater Baha'i community, to John Piltz and Jeremiah Adams, who is the host today, for inviting me for this presentation. Okay. This presentation is dedicated to the memory of a Baha'i teacher, scholar, and martyr, Kamaluddin Bakhtaver. There's a color picture of him here, and quite a bit of this presentation will actually be informed by his contributions to this topic. He was martyred in 1981. Mr. Bakhtaver was executed by a firing squad in Kashmir in the province of Khorasan in Iran. He was imprisoned there. He was originally arrested in Mashhad along with another Baha'i. And we're going to see later on in this presentation a couple of excerpts from his book, which in English is Treatise on the Continuity of the Manifestations of God, published in 1974, and which Stephen Lambden, another Baha'i scholar, has drawn attention to, and what Stephen Lambden calls Baha'u'llah's Tablet of the Seal of the Prophets. So I think there'll be a provisional translation by Dr. Khazeh Fenanapazir that will be presented later on, pardon me. Now, the Tablet of the Seal of the Prophets, to use Stephen Lambden's expression, was first published by Mr. Bakhtaver, who was admitted to law school and also another degree program, a graduate degree program in Islamic studies. But once it was discovered that he was a Baha'i, he was dismissed from being a graduate student and a law student. All right, so what is the context for this discussion? Well, as you know, Baha'u'lláh proclaimed himself to be the promised one of all religions and initiated a worldwide proclamation. And we're going to see that there were stages in Baha'u'llah's proclamation, which this key text by Baha'u'lláh clearly shows. Baha'u'lláh writes, "Behold and observe, this is the finger of might, by which the heaven of vain imaginings was indeed cleft asunder. Incline thine ear and hear. This is the voice of my pen, which was raised among mystics, then divines, and then kings and rulers." And this is from an undated book called Eshraqat, page 260. A version of this was published in Nader Sa'idi's Logos and Civilization, but a fuller translation was provided in a Baha'i 2019 article published for the Baha'i World, replacing the sword with the word, Baha'u'llah's concept of peace. So here's the Seal of the Prophets verse, Quran 33:40, which we had read earlier. "Muhammad is not the father of any of your men, but the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. God has knowledge of everything." Now let's talk about the problem. We're now focusing in on Baha'u'llah's proclamation to divines, having completely passed the proclamation to mystics. And remember that later on, when Baha'u'llah proclaims to kings and ecclesiastics, he also, according to some research that Dr. Yuli Ioannessian and I had done on the Tablet of Glad Tidings, Baha'u'llah's proclamation appears to have also been directed to scholars and statesmen. So Baha'u'llah warns, beware lest any name debar you from him who is the possessor of names, or any word shut you out from this remembrance of God and source of wisdom amongst you. Take heed lest the word prophet withhold you from this most great announcement, or any reference to vicegerency, debar you from the sovereignty of him who is the vicegerent of God, which overshadoweth all the worlds. And that's from the most holy book. So when Baha'u'llah revealed the Kitab-i-Aqdas in 1873 or thereabouts, this was still a very much a live issue. Now, I chose selectively a couple of commentaries, modern ones. This is from the Study Quran, the editor-in-chief of which is Sayyid Hossein Nash. He says that the prophet is the seal of the prophets is understood to mean that he is the last prophet sent to humanity. The prophet is reported to have said, quote, no prophethood shall remain after me, save for visions. I may be skipping words that I can't see on the right hand. There will be no messenger or prophet after me. And then there's a hadith that's quoted that goes like this, where the prophet says, my likeness among the prophets before is that of a man who has built a house, completed it, and beautifies it, yet left empty a place for a brick. Then the people come to the house, are amazed by it, and say, if only you were to place that brick, your house would be complete. And then the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says, I am that brick. And one more quote from the Study Quran. According to the prophet, being the seal of the prophets is having 6 qualities that distinguish him from other prophets. I have been favored above the prophets in 6 things. I have been endowed with consummate succinctness of speech. I've been made triumphant through dread. War booty has been made lawful to me. The whole earth has been made a place of worship for me. For what is the word I can't see?
Worship for me and a means of purification. I have been sent to all created things, and the succession of prophets has been completed in me.
Thank you. So that is fairly representative of a typical, almost universal view of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, the last commentary I chose is this, Jeremiah.
I can read that. Sufi commentaries on the Quran in classical Islam. In some definitive knowledge, I'm not sure I can pronounce the words though.
Jeremiah, okay.
Al-ilm al-qati.
Necessary certainty.
Al-yaqeen al-daruri.
Okay.
And the consensus, ijm, of the pious predecessor and descendants all agree on the fact that there is no way that anyone can have knowledge of the precepts of God referring to his command and prohibitions except by way of the messengers. And the one who says, here is another way by which to know his command and prohibition without the messengers, so that he dispenses with them, is an infidel, kafir, who should be killed. His repentance should not be sought, and there is no need for questions and answers from him. It is a belief in the perpetuation of prophets after our prophet, whom God has made the seal of his prophets and messengers. There is no prophet or messenger after him.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Well, this is a medieval view, and it's not, I would say, typical, especially where it says he's an infidel who should be killed. His repentance should not be sought, and that there is no need for questions and answers from him. But it's an example of how this view can become radical. Here's another formulation of the problem by Baha'u'llah. Why don't you read it, Jeremiah?
It is clear and evident that whenever the manifestations of holiness were revealed, the divines of their day have hindered the people from attaining unto the way of truth. Furthermore, among the veils of glory are such terms as the seal of the prophets and the like, the removal of which is a supreme achievement in the sight of these base-born and erring souls. All by reason of these mysterious sayings, these grievous veils of glory have been hindered from beholding the light of truth.
Thank you. All right. Now, we're going to play a clip from this, but when I was teaching at Michigan State University from 2000 to 2004, I was teaching research writing with an American focus, and the faculty were encouraged to use popular culture. And so I did most of my courses using poets and performers' visions of America. I was the America professor at Michigan State for that time. And there's a John Lennon, Paul McCartney song recorded in the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which NPR in its 50th anniversary commemoration said maybe the best rock album ever recorded, for its artistic value and so on. And the lyric goes like this: I saw a film today, oh boy. The English army had just won the war. A crowd of people turned away, but I just had to look, having read the book. And the point here is, when it comes to the Quran, which is often referred to as the book, we cannot turn away at the seal of the prophets verse, but we have to look further. That's the point of this brief exemplar from popular culture. Baha'u'lláh further formulates the problem in paragraph 181 of the Book of Certitude. How strange! These people with one hand cling to those verses of the Quran and those traditions of the people of certitude, which they have found to accord with their inclinations and interests, and with the other reject those which are contrary to their selfish desires. Quote, believe ye then part of the book and deny ye part? So this is just my formulation of a solution, even though I put it here as the solution. After Quran 33:40, read 4 verses later at Quran 33:44. Now, another excerpt from the study Quran. This is fairly representative of what is known or thought of Quran 33:44 with this brief commentary. The greeting of peace may be from God, the angels, the other people of paradise, or perhaps all of them. This is one of several verses that speak of the greeting of peace that awaits believers in the hereafter, as in Surah 16, verse 32, those whom the angels take while they are in a state of goodness. They will say, peace be upon you, enter the garden for that which you used to do. And then there are parallel verses. Now, I have a comment at the bottom here, which is, here there is no hint of a future prophetic revelation. Therefore, Baha'u'lláh will unseal this verse. The study of eschatology, which is a fancy word for the doctrine of last things, involves the study not only of the afterlife, which this comment is about, the hereafter, but also about the end of the world, the end of history, the eschaton. So here the commentator is treating this verse as a prevision of the hereafter. So here's a thought: if God cannot be seen directly, I have to correct that one word here, which I will do after this presentation. If God cannot be seen directly, then what does meeting God mean? Baha'u'lláh explains. So here we get to a very interesting part of the Book of Certitude, which, by the way, Bahá'u'lláh elsewhere calls the Sayyede Kotub, the way it's translated in the Tabernacle of Unity is cynosure of books, or cynosure of all books. It can also be alternatively translated as Lord of Books. Bahá'u'lláh writes, even as the Lord of Being hath in his unerring book, after speaking of the seal in his exalted utterance, Muhammad is the apostle of God and the seal of the prophets, hath revealed unto all people the promise of, quote, attainment unto the divine presence, unquote. To this attainment to the presence of the immortal King testify the verses of the book, some of which we have already mentioned. The one true God is my witness. Nothing more exalted or more explicit than attainment unto the divine presence hath been revealed in the Quran. Well is it with him that hath attained thereunto in the day wherein most of the people, even as ye witness, have turned away therefrom. And from paragraph 182, and yet through the mystery of the former verse, they have turned away from the grace promised by the latter, despite the fact that, quote, attainment unto the divine presence, end quote, in the, quote, day of resurrection, end quote, is explicitly stated in the book. It hath been demonstrated and definitely established through clear evidences that by resurrection is meant the rise of the manifestation of God to proclaim his cause, and by attainment unto the divine presence is meant attainment unto the presence of his beauty in the person of his manifestation. And finally, in paragraph 182 continued, it's a long paragraph, I won't quote all of it, but this follows. Bahá'u'lláh writes, for verily, quote, no vision taketh in him, but he taketh in all vision. Quran 6:103. Notwithstanding all these indubitable facts and lucid statements, they have foolishly clung to the term seal and remained utterly deprived of the recognition of him who is the revealer of both the seal and the beginning in the day of his presence. But apart from all these things, had this people attained unto a drop of the crystal streams flowing from the words, God doeth whatsoever he willeth, and ordaineth whatsoever he pleaseth, they would not have raised any unseemly cavils such as these against the focal center of his revelation. Now here I want to talk about an extraordinary feat on the part of Shoghi Effendi, and I think it's an act of genius. In his dual role as the infallible translator and interpreter of Baha'i scriptures, in his capacity as the guardian of the Baha'i faith, which his ministry lasted, as you know, from 1921 to 1957, Shoghi Effendi provides a word-for-word literal translation in rendering the Persian Arabic text of the Agon, paragraph 182, in part as follows, and yet through the mystery of the former. Then Shoghi Effendi, in the process of translating from the source language to the target language, while preserving the meaning of the former, inserts one word for amplification. That word is verse. This word, the Arabic azayah, is not found in the original Persian of the Agon in this key passage. Shoghi Effendi's subtle yet highly significant one-word gloss disambiguates the text, narrowing the reading. And so we have an interesting result here. You know, we know what the former verse is, which is the verse that Baha'u'lláh quoted in paragraph 181, the seal of the prophets verse. But now we know what the verse after refers to, which would be Quran 33:44. Now in paragraph 181, Baha'u'lláh has already alluded to parallels, in other words, these divine presence verses or these meeting God eschatological texts elsewhere in the Quran. But by telling the reader you should have looked at a few verses to see the promise of meeting God, meaning the promise of attaining the presence of God. That's why these two should be read together, these two verses. So again, here are the verses. Jeremiah, would you read them, please?
Muhammad is not the father of any one of your men, but the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. God has knowledge of everything. And that's Surah 33:40. On the day when they will be brought into the presence of their Lord, their greeting to each other will be, peace be with you. God has prepared an honorable reward for them. And that's 33-44.
Thank you, Jeremiah. This is actually a Shia rendering by Muhammad Sarwar. And notice that the choice of the wording here is presence of their Lord, which comes close to Bahá'u'llah's reading, in my view, of this text. Now, with his permission, Dr. Nader Saidi, who, as you know, is a professor of Baha'i Studies at UCLA, this was an extraordinary message to me, and I made sure to ask if it was okay for me to share this with him. On this analysis, he writes, sorry for not responding immediately. I had to check the originals. I had not noted the subtle point you are discussing. Your comments make great sense to me, and it opens up a new level of meaning within the text. I think the usual understanding of it, namely the reference to the general issues, is also accurate, but what you have explicated is a higher level of meaning within it. Thank you for the perceptive note and sharing it with me. And this email, this personal communication was sent on August 26, 2019. Now, Mr. Bakhtavar, from his 1974 book, discusses the meaning of Quran 33:44. And this is a translation by my friend and colleague, Dr. Sohrab Kurosh. He writes, in describing the exalted station of this revelation, it suffices to mention that the sacred books of the past, the Islamic sources, and the Quranic verses for defining the grandeur of the next revelation, that is the revelation of Baha'u'lláh, named it, quote, attainment unto the divine presence, liqa'ullah. Whereas after the verse, Muhammad is not the father of any man among you, but he is the apostle of God and the seal of the prophets, the Quran has given the people the glad tidings of, quote, attainment unto the divine presence, and states, quote, their greeting on the day when they shall meet him shall be peace. That means that their greetings on the day when they meet God is peace. And he continues. In this verse, the pronoun of the word yaqanahu, when they shall meet him, is in reference to God. And it means the universal manifestation of God, as it is obvious that God Almighty will never descend from the station of abstraction and perfection and embody himself into an imperfect and limited human temple. Therefore, it is clear and obvious that whenever the noble Quran gives the glad tidings of the revelation and presence of God, it is meant the universal manifestation of God. So I was very happy that Dr. Kurosh translated this yesterday. I simply didn't have time to work through the text, and I'm sure his translation would be far superior.
And to say it is Zuhure Kuleye. I'm sorry, we just lost it. It was
Let me go back, please.
Zuhure Kuleye Ilahi.
And who are you?
This is John. Hello.
No, I mean, who just read that? I want to thank you.
Yes, John. Yes.
Oh, John.
Universal manifestation of God.
Thank you.
The word.
Thanks, John. John is also our co-host and a fellow attorney.
Yeah, and because of Chris's screen, he can't actually see the participants in Zoom right now.
Right. That's what allows me to read the full screen. So I don't see any of the participants right now. So another colleague of mine, a native speaker of Arabic, Dergam, are you with us? I know he was trying to join this morning and was having some problems doing that. Everybody else is muted, I guess, right, Jeremiah and John?
Yeah, everyone else
Yes.
is muted. It's just
Under-
you and John and myself.
I don't see him if you're asking.
John
I
is
don't see him.
not, yeah, I don't see him in here.
Okay. He writes, we find 3 or 4 Quranic verses in these 2 paragraphs. He's referring to paragraphs 181 and 182 of the Book of Certitude. But we do not find the full text of the latter verse, Quran 33:44. Here is where some Islamic literacy, meaning a good familiarity with the Quran itself, would be expected on the part of Baha'u'llah's immediate audience, who, after all, were Babis particularly and Muslims generally. In fact, Baha'u'llah did not quote the full seal of the Prophet's verse of Quran 33:40 and simply alluded to the quote, meeting/attainment, meeting God, attainment unto the divine presence verse at Quran 33:44. Baha'u'llah's audience would be expected to recognize this latter next reference. And Dergam Agigi continues. He says, speaking for myself, Baha'u'llah's reference to Quran 33:44 as the latter verse is perfectly obvious to me as a native speaker of Arabic, with a good familiarity with the Arabic text of the Quran as a whole. So, by Shoghi Effendi's adding the word verse, which is a skillful, quote, idiomatic translation from the source language of Persian and Arabic into the target language of English, and also a masterful interpretation of this passage as well, the 2 issues can be considered in light of these pair of interrelated verses in close textual proximity to each other. And Dergam Agigi concludes, one wonders why the text of Quran 33:44 was not included in the final text. Maybe he needs a footnote here, because as you know, this passage, Quran 33:44, does not appear in the footnotes of the official translation by Shoghi Effendi of the Book of Certitude. So let's look at some similar ideas and approaches with by way of parallel Babi and Baha'i texts. The Bab in the Persian Bayan, according to Edward Granville Brown's partial translation and paraphrase and summary, is as follows. The Bab writes, the eternal essence cannot be comprehended or described or qualified or seen, though by it all things are comprehended, described, qualified, and seen. And therefore, what is meant in the holy books by, quote, meeting with the Lord is meeting with the manifestation of the point of truth, which is the primal will. Thus, in the Quran, by, quote, meeting with the Lord, end quote, is meant meeting the apostle of God, even as it is said of the true believer, quote, to behold him is to behold the prophet of God, and to behold the prophet of God is to behold God. Whoever attains to the meeting with him whom God shall manifest attains to the meeting with God. And then this is from the Surah of Patience, or alternatively known as the Surah of Job, by way of a provisional translation and transliteration by Dr. Omid Ghamagami, shared by way of both a personal communication and posting to a private translation list called Tarjuman in April 2017. This is the translation. So remember that Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By says that we do not know the exact words that Baha'u'llah spoke on April 22nd, 1863, on the first day of Rizwan, when Bahá'u'lláh privately declared his mission to several of his fellow Babi companions. That said, and these are my own words, we do know the exact words that Bahá'u'lláh revealed in the tablet of the Surah of Patience, or the Surah of Job, and this is an excerpt. Bahá'u'lláh writes, "Recite then unto them that which the celestial dove of the Spirit hath warbled in the holy Rezvan of the Beloved, that perchance they may examine that which hath been elucidated concerning sealing by the tongue of him who is well grounded in knowledge in the prayer of visitation for the name of God, Imam Ali, for it should be for the Imam of God. He hath said, and his word is the truth. He, Muhammad, is the seal of the prophets of what came before him and the harbinger of what will appear after him. In such wise hath the meaning of sealing been mentioned by the tongue of inaccessible holiness. Thus hath God designated his friend Muhammad to be a seal for the prophets who preceded him and a harbinger of the messengers who will appear after him." Another parallel text comes from the Arabic text that Baha'u'lláh alludes to in the Book of Certitude. This is Gems of Divine Mysteries, where Baha'u'lláh writes, "Know then that the paradise," literally this garden, "that appeareth in the day of God, surpasseth every other paradise and excelleth the realities of heaven. For when," literally, "for after God blessed and glorified be he, sealed the station of prophethood in the person of him who is his friend, his chosen one, and his treasure." These are exalted terms referring to the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, "amongst his creatures, as he hath revealed from the kingdom of glory, but he is the apostle of God and the seal of the prophets. He hath promised all men that they shall attain unto his own presence in the day of resurrection. In this he meant to emphasize the greatness of the revelation to come, as it hath indeed been manifested through the power of truth." And another parallel text from the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, Baha'u'lláh writes, "In truth I say, on this day the blessed words, 'But he is the apostle of God and the seal of the prophets,' have found their consummation in the verse, 'The day when mankind shall stand before the Lord of the worlds. Render thou thanks unto God for so great a bounty.'" So here, it's worthy of note that Shoghi Effendi follows Rodwell's translation of Quran 83:6, word for word. And we see here that there is a pairing of another verse. Instead of pairing Quran 33:40 with Quran 33:44, it's companion verse, at least according to our theory presented here. There is another companion verse, Quran 83, verse 6. So those two verses should be read together. Now, we had a discussion on the Tarikh, or Baha'i history list, another private list devoted to Baha'i history, on this topic generally. And it was pointed out that Mr. Bakhtavar was the one who first published the tablet to Hassan Shah Abadi, which again, Stephen Lambton has called the Baha'u'llah's tablet of the seal of the prophets. He published this for the first time in 1974. The tablet was later republished in the Canadian Baha'i magazine Andalib. And there's the cover of issue 54, pardon me, and then the tablet itself. So this is a provisional translation. Can you read the top, Jeremiah, please? The top heading. This is by...
Original translation by Dr. Haze Fanana Pazir.
Thank you. The menu has blocked this, so thank you for verifying that. So according to Dr. Haze Fanana Pazir's provisional translation, Bahá'u'lláh writes, "He shineth from the horizon of the heaven of true knowledge with wisdom and utterance. O Hassan, hearken unto the call of Hossein," referring to here to Bahá'u'lláh, "who hath been incarcerated in the prison fortress of Akkā, by reason of that which the hands of the heedless have wrought." If one were to question them, quote, by what reason hath he imprisoned him? They would reply, "Verily, he hath come with a new Sharia, and this new Sharia doth not accord with the law which we have been brought under. To this matter testifieth our book, which is called the Quran, a book that is from God, the Lord of all mankind. See that which the All-Merciful hath revealed therein." Quote, "Verily, he, Muhammad, is the messenger of God and the seal of the prophets." Bahá'u'lláh continues to write, he says, "To this we reply, indeed, thou speakest the truth. We do testify that through him, Muhammad, messengership and prophethood have both been sealed, and anyone after him claiming this most exalted station is in manifest error. Nevertheless, O questioner, hearken unto my voice which saith, open thine eyes, that thou mayest behold the most great beauty, through whom speaketh the Lord of divine decree. By God, through him the hour hath appeared, and the resurrection hath come to pass, and the moon hath been cleft asunder, and thou wouldst behold in an ongoing regeneration, if thou beest of them that possess insight." The tablet of the seal of the prophets continues. Bahá'u'lláh writes, "Verily, through his advent hath come to be fulfilled the advent about which glad tidings hath been given by the messengers of God from all eternity, and there hath come to pass about which God hath revealed in the Quran, quote, on that day they shall all rise before the Lord of mankind." Quran 83, verse 6. Truly, the cycle of prophethood, which literally reads the carpet of prophethood, hath been rolled up, and he who hath sent down the prophets hath come, arrayed with a manifest and perspicuous sovereignty. The tablet continues, "He verily is the one at whose advent all created things have given this utterance, quote, the kingdom is God's, the sovereign, the almighty, the all-praised," end quote. He is the one for whom the necks of God's chosen saints have been outstretched in longing and ardent expectation, and every prophet hath awaited his presence in this wondrous day. He is the one through whom the one unseen and hidden hath been made manifest, and the one whom no one hath known save he himself, the one king over all mankind. Peruse ye the Quran and all God's books revealed in the past, that haply you may recognize this day, illumined by the countenance of thy Lord, the manifest, the perspicuous one. Thus have we illumined the horizon of the firmaments of this tablet with the luminary of our word, a word through which God hath brought into being all creation from all eternity to all eternity. Praise be to God, the Lord of all the worlds. So that's the last of the exemplars, parallel exemplars I'm sharing with you today. These are 3 previous publications of mine. Lack of space, has made this very selective. I want to refer our listeners, especially to the work of Dr. Stephen Lambden, who shared many of his ongoing studies with me, and his work is a work in progress. I think recently there was an article in French of his translated and published in French. Dr. Lawson has done extraordinary work on the Bab and also in Baha'i studies. And there's a vast literature in Baha'i studies, generally speaking, on this issue. Okay, well, that ends my presentation. I know it's a little bit early, but it leaves more time for discussion and questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Buck. It's appreciated that you're able to make such a comprehensive presentation and exposing people to something that really isn't as common or as known as I personally would like it to be either. I have a question for you, and this is about the Iran in general, as you're familiar with having a lot of references made by Baha'u'lláh. It's two parts. The first part of the question is, Baha'u'lláh makes a lot of references outside of the Kitab-i-Iran throughout the Iran, correct? The question again is about Baha'u'lláh and the references that he makes throughout the Kitab-i-Iran. For example, the Bab's uncle is the person who asks Baha'u'lláh a question, which is why the Kitab-i-Iran was written. And Baha'u'lláh is writing to answer a question of someone who has asked him a series of questions, and the Kitab-i-Iran is that response. So it's written, yes, for everyone now to have and read, but it was written to answer a person's particular queries. As such, it's my understanding that throughout the Kitab-i-Iran, the references that are made throughout are numerous and not just limited to, for example, this one reference that we're talking about today. Am I correct about that?
Absolutely, not only explicitly, but implicitly and by allusion. It's saturated with references to the Quran. That's correct.
And there's even a reference to one of the Shaykhi books that Baha'u'lláh had responded regarding as well, correct?
Yes.
So there's a lot of references and allusions Baha'u'lláh makes to the Iran, and we aren't just encouraged to actually understand them, but it's mandatory in a sense of reading the Kitab-i-Iran to understand them if we want to really say we've understood what he's talking about.
At least insofar as Baha'u'llah's understanding of those texts, I fully agree. The study of those texts is quite challenging on its own.
So as a follow-up question to reading the Kitab-i-Iran, it is also important that we recognize that reading the Kitab-i-Iran is not a one-time read, that we read it one time, we gather a lot of information, and we have to read it a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time, and keep unraveling its secrets. So it's not just a book for a one-time read.
Absolutely. You know, the greatest Baha'i scholar of the heroic age of the Baha'i faith, Mirza Abul Fazl al-Qabaikani, says that he had read the Iran some 40 times. So that's perfectly correct. You know, there's a story I published as the first article in the series published on BahaiTeachings.org called Figuring Out Prophecy, where I recount my experience in coming to this realization. I had to read these two paragraphs repeatedly over and over. And then, you know, it's not just reading the Iran several times or more than once, but, you know, studying the passages in it deeply over and over again. That's my experience.
And to also clarify, and if you could please confirm this, the understanding that Baha'is have from the Kitab-i-Iran about the seal of the prophets having multiple meanings is also true, correct? There's not just the one meaning we discussed, but there's also the meaning that there's the cycle of the Adamic cycle that ended and so forth. All those other understandings are also equally correct, right?
Yes, John. In fact, you know, this is sort of a culmination of a lengthy previous argument Baha'u'lláh has engaged in, where he relativizes the idea of the seal of the prophets to actually be true of each and every one of the manifestations of God. So just to, you know, and then he quotes different traditions as well as verses of the Quran. For example, a tradition from the prophet, I am all the prophets. I am the first Adam, and so on. So in that sense, Baha'u'lláh takes that hadith and applies it to all the prophets, literally. And well, if that's true, then every prophet is the first and the last, and so on. So with that general understanding, which leads to the Baha'i doctrine of the unity of the manifestations of God, the unity of all the messengers of God, we have a general relativized meaning of the term seal of the prophets. And taking the Bab's writings into account also, when a new messenger appears, that seals or perfects the, I wouldn't say seal, the prophet who appears, the messenger of God who appears, is the seal for all the prophets who have appeared previously. Are you with me? John, are you with me on that?
Can you repeat the last part again, if you don't mind?
Well, let's take the appearance of Jesus Christ. In that sense, if I understand Baha'u'llah's rationale correctly, at that time, Jesus was the seal of the prophets with respect to all the preceding messengers. And so each manifestation of God who appears, perfects the previous, all the previous revelations have been perfected in the appearance of the present manifestation of God, and attaining to that, the presence of the manifestation of God for that day and age is in reality attaining paradise, attaining spiritual illumination and fulfillment. That's my limited understanding, John. Yeah, the argument in the Book of Certitude, it takes a full book, which was dictated in 2 days and 2 nights, quite a remarkable feat in itself. And it's one extended commentary on this whole question. So yes, there's a complex argument, simple but complex on this issue.
So in short, we recommend everyone who's been exposed to this, all of you who are just coming into contact with the Baha'i faith or not, definitely pick up a copy of the Kitab-i-Iqan. That's the takeaway, the Book of Certitude, very important to read it. Now, to go to the next question, it is on the concept of God and how people understand today around the world, millions of people understand today that literally God is going to enter our existence on Judgment Day. The heavens will be cleft asunder and so forth, and God will be with us, literally. And of course, in one sense, people can say God is everywhere, but I don't at all imply any of that. What I mean literally is the idea of the divine presence believed by millions of people around the world to not be in the form of a manifestation of God as a representative of God on earth, but the entrance of an infinite being into the finite existence that we are in. And I can point out from a website called whyislam.org, the concept of God in Islam. I'll just read. Muslims believe in one God who created the universe and has power over everything within it. He is unique and exalted above everything he creates, and his greatness cannot be compared to his creation. Furthermore, he is the only one deserving of any worship, and the ultimate purpose of all creation is to submit to him. The Islamic understanding of God is distinct from all other religions and beliefs in various respects, since it is based on the pure and clear understanding of monotheism. This is per the website that I'm reading. This essentially captures the concept of God in Islam, which will be further elaborated on that website. But the point of me having read this is that it's very clear that there's a exaltation of God in Islam, as is taught, above everything else, all his creatures. So my question is, how is it that we go from such an aloof, exalted, such a placeless understanding of God in one sense, how do we come and personalize him into existing into this physical plane in eschatology that many Muslims believe? How do we go on this 180 degrees to a literal occurrence of a being that is effectively going to, by just being in the same existence, destroy us? How does it happen? How do we have this logical jump?
The short answer in Arabic, which I won't repeat here, but simply translate, the short answer is without how. literally, without how, without knowing how. Because that question cannot be answered unless it is to refine that answer to say, well, meeting God in person is physically impossible. And so Baha'u'lláh in paragraph 182 of the Iqan quotes the Quranic verse that says, no vision taketh in him, but he taketh in all vision. So if you can't see God, if the finite cannot approach the infinite, what does meeting God mean? And that's the beauty of Baha'u'llah's explanation. So unless you are to simply, without reason, in answer to that question, simply reply with two words, without how, or without knowing how, which is basically no explanation, just a statement, why believe it no matter what? The answer is, well, that's a wrong assumption. That can never happen. It must mean something different.
And I think just to cap this off, and I see, Mehdi, you raised your hand. Just to finish this, to cap it off, there's this understanding of what is faith. And a lot of people that I meet who are people of faith, their faith is on one level, and I see that faith can be many things, but it's in one understanding. The faith that I am confronted with, that I am told that is faith, is that without explanation, you are to believe. Without any further, without any congruence with scientific understanding, it is and it must be believed, and that's it. But Baha'is have faith. We claim to have the same God and the same message that was given to Muhammad, that was given to Jesus, that was given to Moses, given to Buddha, Krishna, all the manifestations of God of the past, all of their messages, and the faith that all humanity had to have in our hearts and still have to have in our hearts, it remains the same. So my question is partially, why the difference? Why is it that the faith that Baha'is hold, even though we claim it's the same as the faith of the religions of the past, why is it on its face so different that we have to believe something without understanding in religions of the past, but then Baha'is are told science and religion go hand in hand, modern day, we're to believe a lot of things, but our faith doesn't go that way. Why is it? Where's the misconnection? Why are we disconnecting? How do we build a bridge to understand this commonality of faith?
Well, let's break down faith into two applications, all right? One is an individual belief. Are you with me?
Yes.
The other is the idea of faith, meaning religion in general. So if we distinguish those, it's my understanding that Baha'u'lláh talks about the oneness of religions, which we can translate as the oneness of faiths. Are you with me?
Yes.
Okay. That doesn't extend to the individual types of faith that believers have. And for me, growing up as a born-again Christian, faith literally meant believing in the word of God literally, no matter what. No matter if it was incongruent with reason, if it flew in the face of common sense, if it was impossible of literal fulfillment, didn't matter. Again, in a Christian sense, it was without how. That seemed to be the most faithful belief in God, is believing in the word of God, word for word, exactly as it was revealed by its surface or literal meaning. So for example, you might make an exception when Jesus says Herod is a fox. Well, we can understand that as a metaphor. Well, then when you get into deeper understanding of scriptures, you see all kinds of literary devices, figures of speech at work. And what the mind does when approaching a religious text is to unconsciously, or sometimes consciously, make a decision at the outset whether to understand this passage literally or figuratively, literally or symbolically or spiritually. But that's often unconsciously done, and in the case of a literalistic reading, not done at all, or very rarely done. So the difference between your faith, which is conditioned or guided by reason, i.e. the harmony of the principle of the principle of the harmony of science and religion that you just invoked, means that the quality of your faith is more rational as well as spiritual. That doesn't mean I can go around and attack. In fact, it's the wrong thing to do to deprecate or criticize other people's faiths. You have to do it very gently. You know, I made a big mistake one time, just to give you a teaching story. When I was teaching a gentleman the faith, and he told me that of his belief that Eve in the Garden of Eden had sex with the serpent. And I really ridiculed him for that belief. And that was my mistake. Because, you know, Abdu'l-Baha taught that we should be very kind and considerate and understanding, and very politely say, well, perhaps you might consider another understanding of that verse. At that point, I just let out with an instant reaction. I mean, to me, that was totally absurd. Eve having sex with a snake, you know, with Satan. But I never saw him again. So I learned, you know, the hard way from that experience. So no matter what faith our contacts, our friends and seekers may have, we have to work through that. So I was taught the Baha'i faith by a former monk of the Dominican order. I was raised a Pentecostal. I spoke in tongues. I was filled with the baptism of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit prayed through me. I had the gift of the Holy Spirit according to what I was told and what I thought. And when I first saw the picture of Abdu'l-Baha coming to my first dinner at my teacher's home with his family, and I saw the picture of Abdu'l-Baha on the wall, I rejected it and everything about the Baha'i faith, because all other things are of the devil, according to my belief at that time. In fact, in the Assembly of God Church in San Jose, California, where we used to go to church, the basic lesson I got from Sunday school, as well as sermons, is not only are all other religions of the devil, so are all other forms of Christianity. Then when I went to Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, Washington, when I arrived on campus, my Pentecostal friends warned me to beware of the devils on campus. And I thought maybe they meant drug dealers or whatever, until I finally understood that my Pentecostal friends were referring to Lutherans as the devils on campus. So my spiritual teacher had to be very patient with my Pentecostal dogmatism, which was totally irrational. And over time, I became a Baha'i. As of December 15th, 2022, later this year, will be my 50th year as a Baha'i. So we have to be very patient with people who have these literalistic types of faith.
I appreciate it greatly that we were able to discuss this and that you're able to really talk about this. And thank you so much for sharing such deep personal parts of your past. And definitely, it's one thing that we have as Baha'is the opportunity to have clarification from Bahá'u'lláh himself and the glory of God. We're getting clarification on the meaning of all things, and it's beautiful. The explanation you gave about, and the way I've taken it, which is just to love everybody for who they are, and if they have a conversation with you, you listen, exactly like you said, listen and hear what the person has to say, and actually care about what the person has to say. And if they desire, we can offer another idea. Otherwise, we leave people to themselves, because we're not here to push things on people. And that's really a really important point that you brought up, because the big difference is we're not going to go out and proselytize that this is how it is and you have to believe this or you're going somewhere bad. It's very different, because the person has to ask us. We have to be prompted to ask it because a conversation is being had, not something per se that, again, as you mentioned, talking about this, it's not something that we're forcing, because there has to be a spirit of love, and the spirit of love has to happen because someone has prompted it because they wanted an answer. They're loving the truth. They're seeking truth. So yes, I'm definitely logically aligning what you've said with my own personal approach toward in my own life. And I appreciate you helping me explain this, and hope everyone listening is also taking something away from this, because we are just giving our limited perspectives, and we're talking about this from our own limitations. So we appreciate everyone who's forgiving us for me particularly for my mistakes in conveying what I intend to convey. That being said, before Mehdi, I ask you to ask your question. There was an obvious question. I'm going to forget it, so I have to say it now. And this is from the audience that was asked earlier. Can you recommend a modern English translation of the Quran that is widely accepted as a good translation of the Quran?
I would like to defer to Dr. Todd Lawson. Can you ask him to please address that question?
Yes. Todd, if Dr. Lawson, if you'd be able to share with us that answer.
Yeah, it's a perpetual question in meetings like this. Now with the internet, there are very rich sources for studying the Quran. It's now available in many different ways online. And all translations are abject failures, all of them. There is no excellent, superior, final translation of the Quran in English or any other language. So it's up to the friends to read as many different translations as possible. Take some clues from The Guardian, who liked the Rodwell translation. It would be interesting to see someone explore that question and find out exactly what he liked about the Rodwell translation. Since the time of Rodwell, and around the time that The Guardian passed away, a very beautiful translation appeared, which Chris used in one of the translations of his verses, by Arthur Arbery. It's very beautiful, vaguely archaic English. It captures a great deal of the spirit of the Quran in English. But you know, it is Robert Frost who said that poetry is that which is lost in translation. So we need to study Arabic as Baha'is. It's not a law that we do this, but we really need to do that if we want to drill down deeply into the language and the revelational language. Arbery's translations, sorry for going on and on about this, but it's very important. You will not find a single translation anywhere now, in the past, or in the future that will substitute for the Arabic Quran. It's simply not going to happen. So read as many translations as possible. Use excellent ones like the Study Quran, which is very good. The Arabic, the Arbery Quran. I like very much the Yusuf Ali translation, not only for the translation, but also for the notes that he's added to the text, and the fact that most of them are printed interlinearly or face-to-face Arabic and English. So if you're studying Arabic, it's very, very useful and convenient to look at how he's translated a particular word. So those are three that Abdul Halim is excellent. There's a recent one from Oxford 4 or 5 years ago, which is very good, but they all have flaws. Even Arbery has flaws in it. The choices that people who are saturated in the Quran would not agree with. And it changes. It should be translated every generation, just like history should be written in every generation or every 5 years, re-understood and re-digested. So that's, sorry for my windbaggy answer.
Thank you. No, thank you for thank you, Dr. Buck, for having Dr. Lawson here to explain this. We appreciate it. And Dr. Lawson, thank you for elaborating on this, because it's very important for us to realize the value of the Arabic Quran. As I know, looking online, you don't have the straight answer. You have people say that, oh, it's fine to go look at English translations, and of course people can, but nothing replaces the Arabic Quran, the actual original word that was written. So yes, definitely. And yes,
I have to say something. Just because you know Arabic also doesn't mean that you're going to understand the Quran.
yes.
Okay, this is a very important business. You know, we live in a time and place which we have sort of a leg up in some ways, so we can use historical perspective and understand the rise and development of Islam from a historical Olympus. But we are also blinded by that distance, how the language sounded to the earliest audiences, how this language was generated from the Prophet Muhammad's personal mystical experience, and what all of these things meant. So it's a very important question. It's almost koan-like in its simplicity, but infinitely more complex than your average Zen koan.
Thank you for that clarification as well. That's extremely essential. So even if you can read Arabic, it doesn't mean you're going to understand what you're reading.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's, you know, in every generation from the time during the Prophet's life and till today, there are dozens of Quran commentaries being written by pious believers, Muslims, scholars, artists, mystics, legal people. As we speak, people are connecting with the Quran and writing their response to it and calling it a commentary, or if they're very bold, an explanation of what the Quran means. This is going on from the beginning till now and will carry on. It's a mode of communion, basically. It has a very strong, it's not a mere intellectual exercise. It is an engagement, an intimate encounter with the text, and to try and come up with an answer to what it means, because the Quran, even at the time that it was revealed, was not understood by everyone. All right, there were questions immediately about it.
Yeah.
So it is what it means, and it is also how it means, because when we have the English translation, we lose all of the beautiful, sumptuous Arabic music and rhyme and rhythm. The Quran is rhymed from the beginning until the end, utterly, completely. And the rhythm is very musical, irregular, and so on, but it's very, very important. This is part of the revelation. It's not just meaning. Meaning is sort of on the bottom floor of the university of the Quran. It has to do with engaging with the text. So, yes, it is. In fact, it interrogates the whole notion of what meaning can possibly be, after all, right? So we try to understand the text. The writings of Bahá'u'lláh are exceedingly helpful, needless to say. The Guardian's understanding, Abdul Baha's understanding, but they also are coming out of a long tradition. So we need to immerse ourselves in the history of Islam. During Chris's talk, I'm sorry, I'm taking up too much space. I'll say this and I'll stop. There's nothing in the Quran that we have today and that has existed in this form for 1400 years. There's nothing that remotely suggests that there will not be other messengers of God. Nothing. There's nothing to suggest, in fact, that the world is going to end and that things are going to stop. Nothing. Quite the contrary. The whole ethos and elan of the Quran is that things will continue, carry on and carry on and carry on as they have in the past. What happened was that the Quran was put in a box by the political status quo in an attempt to safeguard the Muslim community from threats from the outside and from the inside, claims to prophethood, and so on and so forth, and seized upon that single verse in the Quran that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. The word seal here actually means in Arabic guarantor or imprimatur. It has no finality. Other words in the Quran, like akhira, also interpreted as last day, actually means the sequel. What's going to happen next? The hereafter, the next stage. The lastness and end is not something, is not a Quranic topic, but it has been pushed into that mold by political and religious authorities for a variety of social and historical reasons over time. So we need to read with new eyes. We need to read people like Marshall Hodgson, who knew this very, very well, and has written perhaps what is still the very best book on Islam and Islamic history. As Baha'is, we need to take it very seriously, because what we will find out is that we are not in disagreement with the spirit of Islam at all. Ma'assalam.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Again, this agreement where it's so congruent. We appreciate that. And Mehdi, we appreciate your patience.
Poor him.
If you don't mind, Mehdi, to ask, because I was asking questions while you had raised your hand, so I appreciate you being patient. If you could please ask your question, Mehdi.
All right. This question was somewhat actually intended to be a partial answer to one of the questions that you raised earlier, John, and that was, why is there seemingly such a disjunct between the extremely elevated view of God in one context, and then you have the concept of the manifestation and the Baha'i writings, where the manifestation is so connected with the presence of God. And I think there's a basis for understanding the Baha'i view in the Quran itself. And oddly enough, it has to do with the very next verses after 33:44, which is 45 and 46. So you have the light verse in Surah 24:35, in which Allah is identified as the light. But then you have in Surah 33:45 and 6, the mention, an address to Muhammad himself, in which Allah is saying that Muhammad is a light, a lamp spreading light. So if you connect those two verses, then you have a implicit connection where Muhammad is identified with the light and the light is Allah. The two words are obviously different in the Arabic in the two verses, but nonetheless, there is a suggestion there. And by the way, the two surahs are 19 surahs apart.
That's intriguing, very intriguing. I appreciate this. Again, this similar idea in the Baha'i teachings is exactly that the light of God shines through these many lamps, that is, these manifestations of God, these messengers who bring this light to humanity, or they're also likened to the rays of the sun that come from the same sun. And they're even likened to the sun, Baha'u'lláh has been called as well the son of Baha, the son of truth as well. It's all interchangeable. This idea of the revelation of God coming to humanity, the light of God, this light. And if I could ask between both, both Dr. Buck and Dr. Todd Lawson, we'd appreciate this idea of this light and this oneness that the Baha'i faith teaches, this one source, which is God. And as the Iran champions, the Kitab-i-Iran literally expresses, as Todd Lawson had mentioned, the cyclical nature of the Quran, mentioning the cyclical nature of revelation. Likewise, the Iran explaining again the cyclical nature of revelation, that it's continuously occurring, has always been and will continue to be. what can we say about this? I'm sorry if it's a too open-ended question. I can clarify.
Well, John, I'd like to invite my colleague, Dr. Sohrab Koroush,
Yes, please, welcome.
if you wouldn't mind doing so.
Dr. Koroush, you have it?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the talk and the discussion. And on that subject, I wanted to mention a tablet of Bahá'u'lláh that called Tablet of Zuhur, Zuhur, the tablet of manifestation. And it really deserves scholars like Dr. Bach and Dr. Lawson to concentrate on that. And that answers the question that you were asking before, that how the abstract infinite God can be presented as the manifestation of God in the world. And Baha'u'lláh explains that and answers that question in the Tablet of Zuhur, which we probably don't have any time to really mention the subjects that Baha'u'lláh explains. So I really invite my precious scholars, Dr. Bach and Dr. Lawson, to look into this and maybe prepare a kind of good study guide to it so that we can all benefit.
If you may, could you please repeat the name of the tablet? We have a question. If you could repeat the name of the tablet and perhaps spell it.
Called Tablet of Loh Zuhur, Tablet of Manifestation.
Loh Zuhur, and we find it online as Loh Zuhur, or could we also find it as the Tablet of Manifestation?
It is in the Majmu'e Iqtidarat, the compilation called Iqtidarat. I might be able to provide the detailed reference to it later on. I don't have it here with me.
Well, we thank you for bringing it up, and definitely, as Regina had asked the question, she will love to later see it, and we appreciate your reference to this. Thank you.
Sure.
So we are near closing around 12:30. I see. Oh, Todd, Dr. Lawson, please unmute yourself.
Very, very briefly.
Yes.
This is thank you, Dr. Koroush, for mentioning this tablet. Very important. But again, we have the devil of translation haunting all our enterprises.
Yes.
I don't know about you, Dr. Koroush, but I cannot think of any place in the writings where Baha'u'lláh or the Bab claims to be a manifestation of Allah. It is Mazhar Ilahi. This is much different than Mazhar Allah. This is a much different idea. What the writings say is that Baha'u'lláh and the Bab and all previous prophets were manifestations of attributes of the divine, of divinity, not of God, okay? This is exceedingly important. It gets lost in the English translation. Baha'u'lláh does not claim to be the incarnation of what is known as God in our language. Why else would he spend thousands and thousands of words speaking about how impossible it is to know what that entity is? It is an entity that is, in the words of the early philosophers, beyond both being and not being. It is something completely inconceivable by us. What happens by virtue of such things as Matthew mentions as the light verse, where even after God speaking, according to Islamic tradition. God speaking is Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth, and then goes on in this maybe the most beautiful scripture that has ever been revealed on the planet that we have evidence of. And then at the very end, God reminds everybody that this is language again, and says, God speaks to people in metaphors, or God speaks to people in mithal, in similitudes. Yadrabu, mithal for people. So he's saying that even this statement at the beginning of the light verse, God is a light, is in fact a metaphor. It doesn't give us positive mathematical knowledge about what God is. Light is the lowest form of this metaphor, according to the philosophers of Islam. This light that we look at here, this can't be compared to the light that the Quran is talking about in that, because it's too vulgar. So it's a different kind of light altogether. This is what is meant by divine manifestation. I mean, this is not categorical and finally meant, but this is the implication. Baha'u'lláh does not claim to be the manifestation of God per se. He claims to be the manifestation of divinity. There's a very serious difference here.
There is another situation that we have to encounter. There are things in this life that we are not able to understand. I always think of an example. Suppose that there is an island in the middle of ocean, and there are a group of people that are on every aspect of human qualities and senses like us, but they are born with a tissue on their eyes so that they cannot see. They are kind of born blind. Then one person that doesn't have that tissue in front of his eyes looks outside and starts talking about the snow on the top of a mountain, or the waves of the sea and the horizon, and the sunlight, sunset, and the colors. Do you think that those people will be able to understand what he's talking about? He has to put his concepts and what he wants to say in the language and understanding of those people who were born blind. Once a born blind person asked, what is the color white? And the person that was answering said, white is like snow. He said, oh, it's cold. He said, no, it's like the swan and nice. He said, oh, it's soft. So how could you explain the concept of the color to someone that is born blind? So these people, this group of people in that island, when that person is talking about the waves on the sea that are roaring towards the beach, what they can understand of that? When he talks about the stars, how could they understand what the stars are? And so Baha'u'lláh has this problem with us, that he is trying to explain these concepts in a limited language and limited understanding that we have. And that's why we assume that we understand, we are able to understand everything. And that's the point of the struggle that we have.
And as a further reading for people, and this is a great point, there is Plato's allegory of the cave for the millennia back, but there is a modern book which actually is very similar to the story of Baha'u'lláh, actually, The publishing of the book, I believe, was the same year as his ascension. I have to double check that. It's called Flatland, A Romance of Many Dimensions. This book, which is an amazing piece of work, explains this 3D object coming into 2D flatland,
Right,
trying to explain the 3D realm to 2D creatures.
exactly.
It is mind-blowing. And for everyone to read, as and we appreciate this, Dr. Korosh, for bringing this up. This is definitely something to look into, because there is no real divergence. It's adding on another layer. It's adding on another plane of understanding to what was already there. There's no actual divergence per se. It is adding and clarifying what is. We are over time, but since we did go over time, and I don't know how to pronounce your name, I'm sorry, Mr. Searing.
Yeah. Lodro, I just wanted to put in a plug for Dr. Hatcher's, the purpose of
Physical reality.
physical reality too, because that's an important component of how reality itself is an analogy of divinity, not of God, but of the attributes of God and of divinity.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes. And again, this is right now, this talk we've had, it is in a very, very big sense limited to only what we could have said. And again, from our limited perspectives, we appreciate everyone who's here listening, either in the Zoom meeting or online, now live or after the fact, to please look at the books that we've referenced and really hone in on this idea of literary devices, of metaphors, symbolism, allegory, analogy, all of these very important means of expressing what is not yet understood in the writings that you read. And there's so much more to talk about, and we appreciate you coming back. We can hopefully have another follow-up to this topic with Dr. Buck, Dr. Lawson, everyone who pitched in, Dr. Korosh, and I'm not sure, Mr. or Dr. Mehdi Wolf. We appreciate it. In German, they say Herr Doktor, so it's like you can combine both. Anyway, thank you all so much for this wonderful, wonderful afternoon. We look forward to seeing you all next Sunday at 11. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.